Greetings, and welcome everyone. This is a special edition of Real Talk with ZSJ, and I am here with two powerful Black attorneys to talk about the Stop Cop City movement that's happening in Atlanta, the national and international implications of that, and also police accountability just more broadly. And so we want to have this important conversation today. But while folks are still coming in, we want to encourage people to hit the thumbs up button, hit the like button, and hit the share button. You can also feel free to let us know where you're watching from. Steve is here from St. Louis, Missouri. Thanks so much for being here, Steve. Make sure you let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from as well. So I want to toss it to Brother Kamau Franklin first, just to give us a brief introduction of who he is and about his work, and then we'll toss it to Nekima Levy Armstrong, and we'll get right into the conversation. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate being back on your show again. My name is Kamau Franklin. I'm an organizer with Community Movement Builders. In my past, I've been a practicing attorney, but I don't practice that much anymore. Originally from Brooklyn, New York, where I organized with the Malcolm X grassroots movement, and also spent some time in Jackson, Mississippi, doing some organizing. So that's all you need to know about me. It's great to be with you again, and I love to get this conversation started. So yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, Kamau, and I'm really grateful for all the work that you all are doing down in Atlanta. Nekima, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nekima Levy Armstrong. I'm a civil rights attorney and a Minneapolis-based activist. I'm also the executive director of the Wayfinder Foundation and a strong advocate calling out the need for police accountability.
Thank you so much. So as you all can see, we have very capable experts here to get into this conversation around the Stop Cop City movement and just police accountability more broadly. If you're just coming in, we just did introductions. Want to encourage folks to hit the like button and also hit the share button. This is a really critical conversation because this movement in Atlanta certainly has national and international implications. So, Kamau, I want to come to you first for listeners who are maybe new to what the Stop Cop City movement is. I don't know how they haven't heard about it, whether it's watching TV or, reading about it. And certainly it's been all over social media. Can you just give a brief, introduction to how your organization, Community Movement Builders, learned about, tell us about what is Stop Cop City about? Just tell us that.
Yeah, I mean, just to give a brief background. So obviously during the 2020 uprisings, when George Floyd was killed, Breonna Taylor was killed here in Atlanta, Rayshard Brooks was killed. Everybody was out in the street mobilizing against the issue of police violence and police terror. And at the time, of course, if folks remember, there were conversations around abolishing the police, defunding the police, finding alternatives to public safety. But during that time period, the Atlanta city government, along with the Atlanta Police Foundation and the Atlanta Police Force, basically decided that they weren't listening to any of that. And what they wanted to do was to double down on a militarized police perspective. And so out of the 2020 uprisings in 2021, those organizations, those institutions put forth the idea of creating a militarized police training center, what we've dubbed as Cop City. And so Cop City is an expanded training center that will have space for a Black Hawk helicopter to land, over a dozen firing ranges. It is being built up to as a military grade equipment. Their training center is going to be a paramilitary training center. They're going to have mock towns to practice urban warfare and to practice crowd control. 43% of the police officers trained at Cop City will not be from Georgia, but will be around the country, so from other states. And in addition to that, Georgia is already doing police training with the Israeli Police Department. And so we always say that the same tactics that are being used against Palestinians are going to be imported here to be used against Black folks, and the tactics used against Black folks are going to be exported to Palestine to be used against them. So this militarized training center is something that we think is a reaction to the uprisings of 2020 to further stop movements and to continue in the over-policing of Black and Brown communities. Now, lastly, this Cop City institution is being put in a forest area, a forest that's called a Walani Forest that's adjacent to a Black community. That area was promised to the community as a space for parks and recreation, hiking trails, biking trails, places for folks to go into the forest and experience nature. The Walani Forest also protects that community from some of the harshest aspects of climate change. There is already flooding that happens in that community. And once they start cutting down the forest, that flooding will increase even more. So we not only understand the environmental danger of cutting down a forest to put a militarized police training center there, but also, again, the idea of stopping movements that came out of a 2020 uprising to challenge police brutality and police violence and to continue the over-policing of the Black community.
Wow. I mean, there's people like in the comments, like, that's wild. And it is wild, like to like hear you really explain it. Did just a quick follow-up question, and I want to go to Nekima. Did the Atlanta City Council and the mayor tell you what the purpose was? Like, who conceived this idea? Like, what is the purpose?
Well, what's very, troubling and dangerous is that the Atlanta Police Foundation, a private nonprofit organization, will be leading up and heading the training center. So a public policing agency is going to be trained by a private nonprofit. That private nonprofit has already raised at the very least $60 million from corporate donors. $30 million of the city's money is going into the training center, and they're taking out additional loans from banks to build this center. So this is something that is going to be led by a private police organization, a foundation, not by the city of Atlanta. The city of Atlanta, through the city council, on the day that this legislation came, where the lease was put up, where the lease is going to be going again to the Atlanta Police Foundation, where they will be paying $20 a year for the next 20 years for over 300 acres of land. Again, 100 acres is to be scheduled to be cut down right away, and there's nothing in the lease that stops another 200 acres from being cut down in the future. The city of Atlanta, on the day that the vote was taken, and we had already done a lot of organizing prior to alert people, to talk about it, to get opinions on it, to do town hall meetings. 70% of those who called in before the vote said they were against the building of Cop City, that they were opposed to it. The city of Atlanta, through the city council, decided to ignore those folks, to ignore those people, and they decided on a 10-4 vote. And originally, 10-4 with 2 abstentions. Originally, it was 16 all for Cop City, but we were able to peel off some of those voters. But they decided to go ahead and enact this legislation in spite of the fact that the majority of people, in fact, the vast majority of people, were opposed to it.
Ooh, that does not sound like democracy to me. Nekima, I want to bring you into this conversation. You have been at the forefront of a lot of the police accountability movement in the Twin Cities. Many people don't know that you were actually one of the first, if not the first person to organize after the video of George Floyd's murder went viral. You hearing this right out of Atlanta, this whole Cop City, and the fact that 43% of the folks who are going to be trained there are going to be folks from out of state. I would just love to know what your thoughts are in terms of, is this in a positive direction around police accountability, or do you see this as more of the same, more police power, just basically gone rogue?
Well, in some ways, I see this as backlash and retaliation for the uprisings against police violence that has been happening in this country. I think that what's happening is as American as apple pie in terms of the militarization of police forces, the use of dollars that could go towards ending poverty in our communities, and addressing a lot of the systemic issues that we face that sometimes open the door for people to think they have to call 911 when an incident happens. And it could go towards building up our system of public education, which we know Black and brown children in particular continue to be denied access to a high quality education throughout most zip codes in this country, but particularly where folks are low income. So I have a number of concerns, as my esteemed co-panelists just talked about, with regard to this building up of Cop City. And I think one of the most disheartening things is to know that there is Black leadership in Atlanta that is rubber stamping this entire process, which is unacceptable. It goes to the heart of what some people say, all skin folk and kinfolk, right? And sometimes we can be hoodwinked and bamboozled when we see a Black person in leadership and assuming that they have our community's best interests in mind. But you have incidents like this that fly in the face of that notion. So I'm very disheartened that this is happening. I think that it is a sign of the times to come. Here in the Twin Cities, as we were in the midst of the Derek Chauvin trial, that was the main officer who killed George Floyd by pressing his knee into his neck, May 25th of 2020. His trial happened in the spring of 2021. And during that same time, a young Black man by the name of Dante Wright was killed during a bogus traffic stop. And as we were protesting in Brooklyn Center, which was a few miles from Minneapolis, as we were protesting there, what we saw was our local government and state government call in officers from out of state to help them patrol. You know, they called in the National Guard, but they were bringing in, they had this thing called Operation Safety Net, where they were attempting to bring in officers from out of state. And we're thinking, this is going to be even worse than what we already deal with. Minnesota's over 82% white. The overwhelming majority of law enforcement officers are white. They live in the suburbs and the exurbs, and they have no connection to the communities of color that they have been given the authority to control. We already face an uphill battle with those officers. And now, you know, what they had decided to do was bring in other, primarily white male officers from rural towns and communities. Again, no real nexus to communities of color to patrol us, and no real clear lines of authority in terms of what they could and could not do and what they could get away with and not get away with. So we were very concerned about that. They wound up calling off those officers, but they had them lined up ready to go. So that signaled to me that there is an even deeper war than what we're cognizant of that is brewing in this country that will make matters worse, and that will undermine our human rights, our civil rights, and our civil liberties. And so I see Cop City not only as an extension of that, but trying to lead the way towards that type of future.
Man, there's so many questions that just came to my mind, like out of that. And Nekima, I feel like you put it so succinctly, just around civil liberties, human rights, all of that. It's almost like we live in a time where none of that really exists when it comes down to it. Kamau, I know that there was a young person that was murdered maybe a few weeks ago. You know, one of the climate activists who, you know, were protecting this beautiful forest that they want to turn into, you know, Terminator 3 or something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I would love for you to speak to that. There was also a question from one of our viewers that I saw that there were some protesters that have been charged recently and arrested in the last, was it 24 hours or 24 to 48 hours? Mm-hmm. And they've been charged with domestic terrorism. Can you speak to those two issues, please?
Yes, definitely. Because I think Nekima is right on point. We live in a sort of dystopian time where the policing authorities are not only increasing their militarization, but now the policing authorities with the political class at hand are increasing their penalties and the criminalization of movements. And so this has all been going on for a little while. We've had time periods where there's been, again, civil legislation that suggests that someone gets hurt at a rally or demonstration, those who call the demonstration are responsible for it. And so this creeping in of having these penalties that or oppositional to protesters is something that's been happening for a while. Here in Georgia, they've taken it to the next level. So here there's a state domestic terrorism law. Even when we first started organizing against Cop City in 2021, there were different arrests that happened at our protests. Over 20 protesters, I would say over the first year and a half, were arrested at various demonstrations. Most of those charges at the time were resisting arrest and obstruction of governmental administration, something clearly within the bounds of what we're used to, even if we felt the arrests were unjustified. Because after the city council put forth this legislation and it passed, Cop City did not go away in terms of the organizing against it. In fact, folks started moving into the forest and became forest defenders to protect the forest from getting cut, the trees from getting cut down. And it was during that time period that basically a task force was formed, which included the Atlanta Police Department, the DeKalb County Police Department, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Georgia State Troopers, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and Homeland Security. This task force formed, we know this because of a Freedom of Information Act of the Atlanta Police Foundation, which had the documents that showed that they were starting to think through and begin the action of putting forth the charges of domestic terrorism. And then in December, they raided the forest and arrested approximately 6 protesters, 6 forest defenders, and that was the first time that they charged people with domestic terrorism. January 18th, they did another raid of the forest, arrested approximately another 6 protesters, and during that time period is where they killed Tortuguita, who was a young forest defender, climate activist. He's listed now as the first climate activist to be murdered within the United States. So it was several police departments and agencies that went in. They concocted a narrative. Somehow there's no body camera imagery of this killing, even though it was several different policing agencies. They all forgot to not have their body cameras on at the time of their interaction with this young person. After that, another 6 or 7 people doing a protest after his killing were also arrested and charged with domestic terrorism. And it's important to point out that particularly during the first 2 raids in the forest, the only thing that these organizers and activists, these forest defenders were doing were sitting in tents and in tree huts. That was the extent of their activity.
And so I saw that.
Yeah, they weren't charged with civil disobedience. They weren't charged with trespassing. Their acts of civil disobedience were tagged as domestic terrorism. 2 days ago, we have a week of action, which is commencing right now in Georgia, in Atlanta. 2 days ago, there was a music festival. There was a breakout that was not a part of the festival of folks who went to the site where Cop City is being built, which was in the Walani Forest again. And then they did property destruction as a form of protest. And yes, they definitely did. The police decided to raid the actual music festival and to arrest people at the music festival, which had nothing to do with the protests. And during that raid, 35 people were arrested and 23 of those people have been charged with domestic terrorism. So we're now sitting at a number of about 42 people who have been charged with domestic terrorism for being protesters against Cop City.
That is so wild. I don't even know how else really to describe it. The other thing that I saw in just my recent research around this is that there is potential charges coming from, is it the state attorney general's office around RICO charges for people who have been organizing around this issue as well? Georgia has RICO. Okay.
Yeah, this is a Georgia state statute, the domestic terrorism. There's also been we've heard information, right? This has not been verified, as in we don't actually know if this is happening, but we're preparing for it, that there may be RICO charges that are going to be brought against not only the folks who've been arrested prior, but potentially against the larger movement to stop Cop City. And we think this is a way of getting other organizations wrapped up in the legal system, making us defend charges, going after the organizations themselves, going after their resources, their personnel. So again, we think this is a expanding and a broadening of the criminalization of organizers and activists during this time period, and particularly organizers and activists who are being active around fighting back against police violence, right? So they've decided to fight back by using the police themselves, the court system, and legislation to stop us all from fighting back against the violence that's been enacted on our communities.
I would absolutely have to agree with that. We have had a number of circumstances in which we have faced arrest, tear gas, all kinds of tactics being used against those on the front lines who are specifically fighting against police violence. I know we've had a couple of bills that show up every year at the legislature to try to further criminalize protesters here in Minnesota. Thus far, they have been able to defeat those bills, but it's really just a matter of time before something like what Kamau talked about passes, in Minnesota and other jurisdictions that have been specifically active around calling out police violence. I mean, activists are definitely targets, not only for arrest, but also surveillance. Here in Minnesota, we had the Minnesota Department of Human Rights come out with a scathing report after a year-long investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department. And that was one of the things that they uncovered, that police officers were setting up fake accounts and targeting the NAACP. During the time when I ran for mayor in 2017 on a police accountability platform, I had cops that showed up at my birthday party in full uniform, sitting at a table, having dinner at the same exact time as my party. That was also referenced in that Minnesota Department of Human Rights report, because at the time I felt that it was an attempt to intimidate me as an activist, as well as the people who attended my party. So the mistreatment and abuse of those on the front lines is not new. However, when you couple that with this monstrosity known as Cop City, it is a recipe for disaster, and it will signal to other jurisdictions that they can get away with the same thing. Now, this is supposed to be a time where, again, the world watched in horror as George Floyd was killed. We saw corporations step up saying, hey, we're going to commit tens of millions of dollars towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, and righting some of the wrongs of the past. You had some jurisdictions saying that they were going to cut back their police budgets. But in Georgia, we see the exact opposite happening in terms of corporations stepping up to ensure the survival and proliferation of Cop City, by contributing money. And then we also see the government essentially continuing to give police carte blanche authority with regard to the use of military weapons, the facility that they're creating, their connection with law enforcement in other jurisdictions, basically to form their own superpower. And it's something that we should all be concerned about, not just folks who live in Georgia. This has implications for everyone who lives in the country, but particularly Black and brown bodies. How can they get all this money together to do what they're doing, but yet they can't put forward basic reforms that would protect people, right? Things that should be common sense that they would refuse to do. Even when we were asking President Biden to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, what did we get? A Juneteenth holiday, right? I'm wonderful taking off that Monday for Juneteenth, but that's not what we asked for. It's sad.
It's sad. And I was in Alabama recently visiting family. There was a tornado that impacted my family down in Selma. So I was there, visiting, checking on folks. And I have a cousin who lives in Huntsville, and he went to A&M and everything. And he was like, yeah, the FBI headquarters is moving here. I said, excuse me? He's like, yeah, they're leaving DC and they just broke ground. They're building the headquarters in Huntsville, Alabama. So I'm connecting that to Cop City. I'm like, what's the government up to? Like, why are they focused on the Southeast all of a sudden? Because I had no clue that the FBI, like, why the FBI, since its inception, has always been in the DC region, in Virginia specifically. And I'm like, why is the headquarters moving to Alabama? So I asked my cousin whether he knew anything about it. He was like, no, we don't know like why they're moving. We just know they just broke ground on building this huge facility. And they're doing the huge facility in Cop City. So I can't help but like put things together. And so my mind just started, twirling these ideas around. And I'm like, man, Black folks are primarily, in the Southeast in this country. You think about it, per capita. And I'm like, this is not a recipe for something that is meant to treat people well. So I don't know, Kamau or if Nekima, if you all knew that the FBI headquarters was moving to Huntsville, Alabama, but that's something
I did not know that. But I do know that in addition to the cop city that's being built here in Georgia, there's conversations about building one in Hawaii, in California, in Chicago. And so these these military bases, right? These military bases for the police are being built around the country to do basically to develop common tactics and strategies. In some ways, this is the forming of a national policing agency, right? Where they're going to do different types of training and recruiting together, have different times of tactics and strategies and plans on handling larger populations, handling communities and neighborhoods. So this is somewhat of the forming of a national policing apparatus, right? And the closest we've had to that so far has been like Federal Bureau of Investigation. So it is not surprising that they are also moving south or expanding their headquarters out here also, because the danger is that the policing, as it's practiced and as it will continue to be practiced, again, is going to be targeting not just the communities that it already has targeted, which is our communities, but seems to me to be a concerted effort to beat back against movements and organizations, particularly those on the left, right? We all know they'll do a little bit of stuff on the right. When we look back at the civil rights history, it wasn't the Klan that was broken up by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was the civil rights organizations. It was the Black Power movement, right? It was the militant movements of our time. That same thing will happen now. There'll be some lip service given to combating right wingers and so forth, but the majority of their efforts are going to be geared towards left movements, militant movements, Black movements, where people are fighting for rights, dignity, and power.
See, this is exactly why W.E.B. Du Bois got up out of here and moved to Ghana in his later years. He just got fed up.
So did Randall Robinson. A couple folks got up out of here.
Seriously, and you can understand
why I'm quitting America.
Right, with what we're up against. A lot of times when we're out on the front lines, we have our voices, but we're dealing with not only police, we're dealing with white supremacists, who have shown up here in the Twin Cities, have intimidated people, allegedly shot at people, allegedly shot people, and gotten away with it, right? So we know that these law enforcement agencies and networks are not honing in on these individuals. If that was the case, they would have been able to stop that attack on January 6th that happened, right? We know they knew about it, but they did not do what they needed to do to stop it, in the same way that they're constantly surveilling activists on the front lines, calling for accountability, calling for transparency, calling for an end to unjust laws, calling for the preservation of human life when there is an encounter with police. We have to hold our elected officials accountable, because a lot of times they're the ones sanctioning and rubber stamping these types of initiatives, but also these corporations that many of us patronize without knowing that they are buying into Cop City. And again, ensuring not only its survival, but that it proliferates.
Yeah, let's get into that. Politics, right? Elected officials. You all alluded to it earlier. All skin folks and kin folks. Elected leadership in the city of Atlanta is primarily African American elected leadership. Now, I know the state government and the state apparatus is controlled by Republicans like the rest of the Southeast. But it seems to be some type of marriage between the mayor and the governor on this police stuff. Do you want to speak directly to that, Kamau?
Yeah, there's like you said,
the Democrats and the Republicans agree when it comes to the police, essentially.
Again, we like to point out that the so-called moderate liberal black mayor of Atlanta has teamed up with the right-wing white supremacist governor of Georgia, with the moderate Democratic president and his administration, to all agree on similar policies for enacting Cop City, and again for charging and watching and surveilling protesters. And you're exactly, I mean, these officials in Atlanta, there's been basically black mayors here for 50 years, majority black city councils here for close to 50 years now. These elected officials are the same elected officials who presided over and helped usher in the gentrification that's turned Atlanta from a 60% black city to one that's less than 49% black, right? And that's under the watchful eye of liberal black Democrats who are doing the bidding of corporations and developers because of their role in changing this city, right? So we have to understand that these elected officials, they're never going to be our friends, right? They're never going to be the folks who work for our communities. These are the folks who, again, as Nekima alluded to, they took $30 million of city money to put towards this training center, but they've destroyed all the public housing in Atlanta. They did that in the 90s when they brought the Olympics in. They gave homeless folks one-way bus tickets out of town. So they've done nothing to help working class and poor black people in Atlanta except to push them out. They don't work for the larger black community. They come to us for votes, but other than that, they work for the corporations and developers. That's who they feel obligated to. That's who their policies are geared towards pleasing. It is not our communities. And so whether or not they are Democrats or Republicans, we have to understand that they do not work for our people. They do not belong to our organizations. They do not press forward our needs. There's no accident that gentrification has happened under these black mayors, just as it's no accident that Cop City is being built and is standing firm on top of it by a black mayor who claims to represent the interests of Atlanta. And it is no doubt or no wonder why when he went to Morehouse, that black mayor was called a sellout by Morehouse students.
I saw that. That was beautiful. Nekima, have you seen similar sort of marriages between Democrats and Republicans who fight on all these other big issues, but when it comes to the police, they're like, oh yeah, they all agree.
Police, it's mass incarceration, it's the war on drugs, where they have historically joined forces. Even Joe Biden, who of course a lot of black folks voted for, helped get into office, participated in the 94 crime bill, and on and on and on. And even now it's coming back up again.
I got cussed out for bringing that up during the election.
Well, here's the sad part. As black folks, we're kind of locked into a political apparatus that is not designed for our success, right? We are constantly placed in a position of the best of two evils, I guess, if there is such a thing, when we are showing up to the polls. And then black women, because we, vote at the highest numbers, we're put on a pedestal when we save the Democratic Party. But what are we actually saving when it comes down to it? When you look at the conditions in our most disenfranchised communities. And we know that, again, you go back to what has happened historically with regard to the enslavement of our people, the marginalization of our people, denial of access to opportunity. We have never corrected those wrongs. The Democratic Party hasn't even attempted to correct those wrongs. Reparations is a non-starter, to the conversation about what black people need. So at some point, there's going to have to be a reckoning with regard to this political system and its connection to black folks, and how we're constantly getting crumbs at the end of the day and still being impacted by situations like Cop City that put our entire community in jeopardy in Atlanta and around the nation. So something has to change, something has to give, because this is completely unsustainable.
Completely unsustainable. I want to hear from both of you to that point, and I want to also get to the corporations. I have to tell you, Kamau, you all did wonderful research, and I know you guys are working with partners. My heart was broken when I saw Delta on there. That's my favorite airline. I'm like, damn it. So I'm just like, Starbucks, like, I'm just like, basically, we ain't gonna be able to shop nowhere because all these corporations are involved, in this mess. I know Delta's headquartered there in Georgia, Home Depot, and all these folks. I don't shop at Home Depot very much. I try to go to Lowe's, but who knows? Lowe's might be doing some other stuff. So, I mean, what is it, to Nekima's point, that we can do to cause a reckoning? I want to go back to the whole, Democrat Republican thing, because like we literally only have I think it's a uniparty. I mean, there's like marginal differences between the two, but really when it comes to Black folks and it comes to oppressing Black folks, they agree. So when it comes to that type of thing, what is some advice, especially for those that's listening and those who will continue to listen to this video as it stays up, for us to move forward? I have to plug the fact that Joe Biden, is moving against his own Democrats in the House with regards to this DC crime bill. DC needs to be able to govern itself. And so, you have him aligning with the Republicans to push back on what DC is trying to do for themselves. So he's just all about the police. He's giving the police more money, carte blanche, and then attach no accountability to it. Like just more money and attach no accountability to it, but yet he's going to come back to our community in 2024 and ask us for our votes. What do we do?
I mean, remember in 2021, I think 2021 or 2022 at the State of the Union address, it was Joe Biden who stood up and said, we don't need to defund the police. We need to fund the police. And he got a standing ovation from both sides of the aisle, right? And so as Nekima has pointed out continually, there is a uniform agreement on policing and basically military when it comes to both parties. There's obviously there's some differences, but they agree a lot more than they disagree. When it comes to these corporations, I mean, we have to understand that the same corporations who told us that they were supporting Black Lives Matter, who gave resources up, these are the same corporations who gave money to build Cop City, right? Who invest not only in the Atlanta Police Foundation, but in these police foundations all over the country, right? Which has become the new way to give extra funding for policing. And why are these corporations doing it? Because they want stability. They basically want you to buy their product, go home and watch their shows, and to shut the hell up. That's really what they want. They want the stability of having you working, having you buying, and having you watching. They don't want us to be actors in our own lives. And so we can never trust the corporate capitalist interests to solve our problems as a community. We can never trust them to do anything but pay lip service, to maybe to give some dollars out of guilt. But as soon as they see which way the wind is blowing, or that they see that their particular interests may be in their minds, may be upset, they're going to run for the police to protect what they see as their private property and their ability to continue operating as a corporation and making a profit. That's what they're concerned about. That's what they care about. We cannot depend on them for our movement. We have to, in my estimation, about things that we can do from the small to the big. So at communitymovementbuilders.org for Cop City itself, we have a list of things that people can do. Everything from calling the corporations and screaming and yelling at them and telling you not going to work, buy from them anymore, to challenging the very developers who are trying to build Cop City, to calling the mayor's office, to calling the city council's office. Those are some of the small things that we can do. There is a National Day of Action being called for on March 9th, this Thursday, where so far, over 15 cities have agreed to do something, everything from civil disobedience to direct action, to banner dropping, to marches, to teach-ins, whatever folks can do. We have to get back out in the street. When we were mobilizing in 2020, the topics of defunding and abolishing, those were omnipresent. Those were being discussed. I'm not saying that we're going to enact them because of the ties that corporations and the policing agencies and the city governments have. But we definitely were being able to push back. We were effectively demobilized because we were told to go vote for Joe Biden. And that by doing that, all of our policy and legislative dreams would come true, right? And as we know, when we are demobilized into the electoral process, basically the power is taken away from us and it's put into the hands of the Democratic Party. We're now being told that people who work for the Democratic Party will solve our problems. And time again, this continues to happen, right? We already know we can't count on the Republicans for anything, but we have to understand that those who come talking slick and smiling in our faces aren't always our friends, right? So we have to continue to build our own organizations. We have to be able to build our own resources. We have to be able to build our own institutions. We have to put power into those organizations, power into those institutions. And then we have to also challenge city institutions, state and federal institutions. But we have to challenge them for real. We can't believe in the lies that they like to tell us how they're working for us. We have to challenge them. And the only time we should use that system is when we have people coming from our very organizations who we can hold accountable to run on the things that we tell them to run on. Otherwise, basically, people are parading in our neighborhoods every 2 years or every 4 years, telling us to vote for them with no guarantee that once they get elected, that they're going to do anything other than switch and do what their corporate backers or the developers tell them, right? And we know that can happen almost under any scenario, but it is less likely to happen if it's folks that we can hold accountable that's coming from us. But that's a tactic, right? The real strategy and plans have to come from our community. We have to build mass organizations. We have to be able to have power over our lives and institutions that impact us. And until we get serious about that, we will always be basically beholden to other people to give us our liberation and freedom. And that's not a path we want to continue to walk on.
Clearly we can't continue to walk on that. That's all amazing. I'm glad you pointed people to the website communitymovementbuilders.org, where folks can see the research that you all have done, and also can see where those different steps are laid out right there on the website. The other thing that I think is critical, I've been listening to Dr. Bobby Wright the last couple of nights, and one of the things that he talked about was us having the ability to sanction people who look like us, who are acting against our interests. I think that that is something that those of us in organizations who are, trying to hold people accountable, that's something that we need to really build a stronger muscle, because I have seen Black folks become demobilized because they don't want to attack another Black person, even though this Black person is in a position of power where they're creating policies that's totally destructive to the masses of Black people. So I think that that's something that we have to figure out. And we certainly don't have to talk about what that is on this show today, but we definitely have to figure that out. Nekima, I see you trying to get in there.
No, I'm definitely in agreement with what you're saying. I think that we need to build a conscious class focused on Black political power, and not just Black political power for the sake of Black political power, because we have the kind of issues that you all are talking about. Even with some of our civil rights organizations, that have been around for a long time, a lot of times we can't separate what's happening with them from the corporations because of, the resources that are. So sometimes people are silent, when they should be standing up and calling these things out. And so as conscious Black folks looking out for the best interests of Black folks, who do we turn to? Right. And so I think Kamau's organization is one clear example, as well as the people that they are mobilizing with and trying to get the word out about this monstrosity being built in Atlanta, and how it's something that all of us need to be concerned about. But it's almost like, I'm not going to say we have to start from scratch, but in some ways we have to be very honest about the current landscape of who is in power and whether they're serving the best interests and needs of our community. And we have to be willing to use our voices, understand that we might lose some friends in the process, but truth and integrity will be intact at the end of the day.
And that has to be primary. I want to also, I guess, switch to how can folks who are watching now support this movement to stop Cop City. I know that there's a bunch of folks who have been arrested. I'm sure that there's some kind of bail fund that may be up. there's lawyers who are working on behalf of you and other organizations, climate activists and things like that. How can people who are watching now and who will watch this video, how can they be supported from where they are?
So you're right. There's a Atlanta Solidarity Bail Fund, Atlanta Solidarity Fund, I think .org, if I'm not mistaken. People can go there and get resources which will help with the payments of bail and legal support for individuals who've been arrested so far. They can obviously help organizations like ours continue to fight. I think it's, again, every time you guys speak, there's like 5 more things I want to say to back up what you said. Like in Atlanta, part of our plan is to make the mayor pay a political price. So even if we lose this struggle because of the power of capital, the power of the police, and all the affiliated organizations that are working with them to build this site, we have enough power to say, hey, you're going to pay a political price for this. You're going to be a one-term mayor. We're going to put so much pressure on you that you're going to regret the fact that you made this decision. You want the DNC to come to Atlanta? We're going to do everything possible to stop them from coming to Atlanta. And if
oh
they
my
do
God,
come,
he wants to bring them to Atlanta?
they're like number 3 in the running for the DNC. They're like one of the last 3 cities. If they do bring them, we're going to protest them. He wants to bring FIFA, the World Cup, here to Atlanta. We're going to let FIFA know. If you come here, it's going to be protested. You're not going to have an easy time in Atlanta with FIFA. And so if you bring these things here, while at the same time, the mayor and the city government and the corporations are militarizing against our communities, then you're going to pay a price. We're going to do that through as much public pressure campaigns as we can, but we will protest if any of these institutions decide to come here to Atlanta, because we need the mayor to pay a political price for pushing this forward when no one asked them to do it.
Are there any marches planned that people can come to from around the country?
Right now, the big one is this Thursday, which, may be a little short now, but this Thursday, March 9th. And again, if the website is nationaldayofaction.info, nationaldayofaction.info. And then you'll see there the set of different organizations and or marches, rallies, demonstrations, teach-ins that are scheduled for that day. And then that's just the beginning. So we plan to come back, join with more folks, more organizations, and say, when is the next day we can do something like that? That's collective, that's together, that puts out the idea that we need a national effort to fight against police violence, and we don't need to demobilize when there are elections.
Absolutely. We might also need a march on Washington as well.
Yeah.
To go in.
Yeah.
And help them understand how serious this is, because a lot of our focus right now is, just trying to get the word out about this and to spread awareness. But we also have to help people connect the dots in their minds in terms of the larger implications of this. Our communities are already suffering under the weight of mass incarceration. It's hardly something people even talk about, with more than 2.1 million people still in our nation's prisons, in state prisons and federal prisons, with no real sense of relief in sight. And when you think about police officers playing a role, that the first folks that people encounter on the streets that then open to their entry into the system of mass incarceration, it is significantly impacting our community. And we tried, even when President Obama was in office. At the time, I was the Minneapolis NAACP president, and we were trying to, get the president to hone in on the system of mass incarceration and to do his part and to amplify the issue. I don't think that his administration went far enough in terms of addressing those issues or even censoring those issues, right? And if he didn't do it, what's the expectation for the other presidents, who have come after him and who will come after him down the line? But I do think there needs to be a national conversation around policing, the war on drugs, and mass incarceration, so that we can turn things around, because this, again, is reminiscent of what happened during the days of slavery. All of it has its origins in slavery, and we are still suffering under the weight of the oppression from those various systems.
That's exactly right. We are almost at our hour. I want to thank everybody who's been listening, been very active in the chat. If you guys have any questions, you can drop that in the chat here. I want to toss it to each panelist to maybe give some closing comments in terms of how we can directly support their organizations. And also, I want to encourage everybody that's watching, whatever city that you're in, try to join a Black organization to help support them and build their capacity. These issues are happening all over the country where there's a large Black population, period. So please, I feel like I hear, Kwame Ture in my ear, join an organization, support an organization, make sure that you are a part of an organization. Wayfinder.foundation is a website that you all can visit and support as well. Lots of work happening around criminal justice and education justice issues at that organization. And of course, communitymovementbuilders.org. Please go to their website, make a donation to support and help build the capacity that they're already doing. We can clearly see that they're doing the necessary work, the work of trying to stop Cop City. I wanted to ask you, Kamau, one last question. You kind of alluded to the fact that you think that this battle with Stop Cop City may have organized enough capitalist resources to push back on your movement. Is there any hope at all that this thing could be stopped at this point?
I mean, I think there still is. I think the amount of attention that's been generated, the amount of organizing and activism that's happened, again, with some of the strategies to make them pay a price, I think there is. I think one of the good things that's coming out of this struggle also, again, is that we've had, even as we build our organization, we've created what I would call a left front. So a group of organizers and activists of different ideological persuasions, different backgrounds, who've gotten to know each other, who are ready to throw down against not only this, but future things that happen in and around Atlanta. So at the very least, we know that that's going to come out of it. But we're doing this work because we know that public pressure and political pressure are things that can make anything happen. When we had students come out a few weeks ago, I alluded to what happened at Morehouse, but Morehouse students, Spelman students, Georgia State, Georgia Tech.
I saw the Spelman professors do an open letter. That was amazing.
That's right. So we know that that's the kind of thing that impacts what happens with elected officials. And so we're pounding on that. It's the students who are going to lead the way ultimately. So we want to make sure that they continue to have all the support they need to organize not only against Cop City, but all the problems and ills that impact our community that they need to be on the front lines for. So yes.
Thank you so much. We're grateful for all the work that you all are doing. Those of us from around the country want to continue to lend visibility to this movement and also continue to donate at your website at communitymovementbuilders.org. Nekima, I wanted to allow you to have an opportunity for some closing thoughts as well.
Well, I would just say, number one, I'm grateful for this opportunity to have this conversation. So thank you, Zakiya, for bringing us on as panelists. And I definitely want to say thank you to Kamau and all of your comrades for rolling up your sleeves and doing the heavy lifting to try to stop this from happening and raising awareness so that the rest of us know what's going on and that we answer the call to action. I want to make sure that you know that the Wayfinder Foundation supports your efforts and however we can to take things to the next level. Please let us know. Both Zakiya and I work for Wayfinder Foundation, and we're very serious about doing the grassroots work, but also providing support. So let us know how we can support you in your efforts. This is a very heavy lift. I know that it can be emotionally draining at times, but I'm grateful that the ancestors chose you to come forward using all of your knowledge and skills and your passion and commitment to do this work. And you're not alone. Many of us care about this issue and we want to know how we can get involved in supporting you. I'm glad that folks are watching and paying attention. I hope after this conversation that people go deeper in their research on this issue and deeper in their commitment to stand up and do something about what's happening. And I agree with Kamau that our students are leading the way, just as they did during the 50s and 60s when they got on buses and went to Mississippi to try to help Black people vote. We need that same energy from our young folks who are not afraid to call out the powers that be, and to put it all on the line for what they believe in. So I applaud our young folks for stepping up to the plate and helping to move things forward. I'm hoping at the end of the day that somehow this project in quotes is able to be blocked, and that the power of the people will prevail.
Yes. Yes, all of that. The power of the people will prevail. We're going to put that out in the atmosphere, that this Stop Cop City movement will be successful, because we know that if these people are allowed to move forward with this monstrosity, I don't even know how else to describe it. It is not going to be good for the residents of Atlanta and for anybody in this country. And even with the international implications, building this national apparatus of policing is extremely scary to me. And the fact that we have politicians of all stripes, literally, who are supportive of it. We have businesses and, huge Fortune 500 corporations who are supportive of it. I'm just so grateful, that we do have this movement and this joining of forces of Black-led organizations and climate activists all together. We saw that the power of the state is coming down hard. They've already murdered someone, and that, they're using every tool at their disposal to stop this movement. So we want to encourage everybody who's listening to this video. The link is up there to donate today to the community movement builders. They've been the organization that has been leading this fight for months, and help to attract the climate activists, knowing about this particular forest that they're literally cutting down to build, a Terminator facility for the police. So thank you both so much. Kamau, I know that you're very busy this week, so I want to thank you for spending this hour with us today to help get this information out to even larger audience. Nekima, thank you so much for all the work that you do, both in the Twin Cities and nationally, and for all the work that you're doing with the Wayfinder Foundation. I want to encourage people to visit wayfinder.foundation to learn more about what we do there at the Wayfinder Foundation. We do education, advocacy, and policy work, and also criminal justice advocacy and policy work. Thank you all so much for listening today. Please share this video far and wide. We want people to know more about this, and we want people to donate to community movement builders. And with that, thank you all so much for watching. Have a good evening, everyone. Thanks, Nekima and Kamau. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye-bye.